We are now going to go to Darrell Bricker. He is our polling guru from Ipsos Public Affairs. Darrell, you know, you've had a chance to look at this. You're an expert at reading the pulse in this country. How do you expect this update to be received based on the pandemic spending that's in it? So some big numbers, but not as big as we thought they might have been.
I don't think people really have a sense what the right size of the numbers are. It's really the intention behind the commitments that are being made they're going to be looking for. And, you know, this government has made a really big transition in terms of the way it talks about what's going on right now. So now they're really clearly in the process of fighting day to day what's going on with the pandemic, which is exactly what the public wanted to hear. The one part that wasn't in here that they seem to be substituting something else for is real conversation about jobs. Because when you go out and you talk to people and you say, what's the most important issues facing the country today? They say fighting the pandemic, which basically they got right. But then the second part of this was unemployment, which is the thing that really stands out for the public. And it seemed to be a lot of subsidies, a lot of money going to various parts of the economy, but not a lot of specific talk about jobs and what's going to be done to protect jobs. And I think, you know, that's going to be a route in, particularly for the opposition parties.
Yeah, and there's certain jobs here that they do talk about the losses and who has taken the brunt of it. And it is new Canadians, it is Indigenous people, it is single mothers, it is young people, it is low-income Canadians, and it is racialized Canadians who are suffering the most under this. And they talk about some long-term secretariats and programs, as well as sectoral support, where a number of those people who have been so hard hit are working, because there are disproportionate numbers of those populations of Canadians in things, for example, like working in hotels, tourism, industries that have been really hard hit. And while there's money in here for those industries in the form of making loans available, making support available, a lot of those jobs are already gone. And that's one of the questions that we had looking at this, Darrell, was, okay, so how are you getting those people back to work, though? You can keep people employed whose employers have managed to hold on to them, but for those who've already been let go, how do you bring them back into the workforce? I mean, are you going to have someone who is working in a hotel going to install solar panels? Unlikely. You could retrain them, but that's not a mass transition plan. Do you think at this point politically, though, Canadians are asking those questions, or are they going to be, like the government, more focused on the immediate term, and this is really something that they can push down the road, you know, punt that can and deal with it at the earliest in a spring budget without there really being any political consequences for that?
Well, given that they've got another chance to talk about this and maybe talk specifically about what you're referring to, maybe they can do it. But exactly the question you're asking is ultimately what the vulnerability is in all of this, which is there's a lot of words, a lot of rhetoric, and by the way, something that's really associated with this government, a lot of talk. The real question is whether or not they'll be able to deliver something on that front. So you can go through, you know, you can put the identity lens on this and talk about very specific groups, but the people who decide elections in this country, not that we're talking specifically about politics, are middle-class private sector people employed who live in the suburbs of the city and may fit into those categories, but may not fit into those categories. And it seems like, you know, there's a real focus on really making this a sort of identity related, and that's generally not how Canadians look at these things. So there's going to be some interesting opportunities for the opposition to chip in on this and maybe put a different spin on it.
Where do you think the opposition are likely to attack based on when they're looking at the kind of polling that you do and that every party in this country, including the Liberals, is doing when they're determining what direction they want to go in? Where do you see sort of the vulnerabilities here that the NDP or the Conservatives might exploit?
Well, for the Conservatives, it's pretty clear. They'll probably go right after the point on jobs. But secondarily, for their voters, deficits actually are important. And, you know, you can talk about guardrails, this, floors, ceilings, that, or whatever. $400 billion is a lot of money. And there isn't a lot of plans being discussed today that would really speak to that. On the other side of this, particularly the NDP, who really wants to, you know, speak specifically about jobs and some of those communities that are going to be most affected by what's going on with the COVID crisis, particularly on the employment front, they're going to want something really specific and active in terms of things happening right now. That's what they're probably going to be demanding. So my expectation is that there's going to be a fair amount here once we get past the gloss of the rhetoric that we heard today, where the opposition parties are going to really dig in and search for details and And based on what we heard today, it doesn't seem like the government's prepared to give an awful lot of them right now.
Okay, Darrell Bricker, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate your insights.
Thank you.